Hello, my name is Jean-Pierre Maldonado, and for my History Research Artifacts project for History 319, I'm going to discuss the Gilbert Stuart Lansdowne portrait of George Washington. Within my 10-minute presentation, I'm going to discuss relevant information regarding the portrait. I'm also going to give you some information about the artist himself and how he is very influential and important to understanding this painting. I'm also going to discuss a little bit of information about George Washington and his relevancy to this project. And I'm going to compare some perspectives between historians and art historians in terms of how they come to understand the Lansdowne portrait and what does it mean to them and what are the implications to a general audience who look at the portrait for the first time if they've never seen it before. I'm also going to understand what's the continued commentary on this portrait between art historians and historians alike, as well as what does the general American public perceive from this painting. Well, to begin, I would like to introduce the artist that was responsible for the creation of the first of several copies of the Lansdowne portrait. And the artist is known as Gilbert Stuart. He was born in 1755 in the English colony of Rhode Island. And as he matured into a young and talented man, he became successful in establishing a name for himself as one of the best American painters of his time due to his ability to create these very beautiful grand manner paintings. And for this video today, one of those paintings will be the subject. And some of his best works actually include grand manner paintings of other important aristocrats in the early British American society, such as the grand manner painting of Horatio Gates, or that of Captain John Gell, or of Matilda Stoughton de Jondinay. Now, this image that you see right here, this is a self-portrait of Gilbert Stuart, but it's not considered to be one of his best works as it is somewhat distorted, and some art historians have suggested that this was the artist's way of demonstrating to the audience that he had a lack of interest in himself as a person, whereas in his portraits of other people, he put greater emphasis on those details because he was more invested of drawing upon the beauty and the aesthetics and all the other aspects that make a grand manner painting beautiful. But just drawing the attention of the audience towards those paintings rather than himself, as he felt more validation when his other works of art were given praise, rather than just him painting a picture of himself and just showing it to the world and demonstrating, I too actually exist. I feel as though this could go without saying, but for anyone unaware of the person that I will discuss today, his name is George Washington. He is one of the founding fathers of the United States, which is one of the world's most powerful countries, though this was not the case when it was first founded. Washington served as the supreme commander of the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War between 1775 to 1783, when the Treaty of Versailles established the United States as a sovereign state in North America. Also, in addition to serving as the commander of the American forces, George Washington went on to serve as the first president of the United States for 2 terms, and he served those 2 terms between 1789 to 1797 when he was succeeded by John Adams, who won the election of 1796. During his presidency, Washington had to deal with a variety of national issues, and one of these issues that kept coming up constantly in the early days of the American Republic was enforcing the federal government's will and power over the states, as there were some issues and complications over what constituted the federal government's authority, and where some of these states, and specifically the American population, saw that the federal government was crossing a line when implementing new legislation, especially excise tax laws. One example of Washington serving as president and commander-in-chief at the same time was when he went out to suppress the infamous Whiskey Rebellion. in western Pennsylvania. And that rebellion saw the destruction of many farmlands and other properties that were in that territory. And it was certainly one of the great political disasters that could have easily spiraled into perhaps a civil war or any other type of conflict had it not been for Washington and his careful maneuvering in suppressing the violence that occurred. Though I could continue talking about Washington, I would like to get to my favorite part of the project, which was the painting itself. Now, there are some complications to this painting. Depending on who you ask, you will get two different names for George Washington's portrait by Gilbert Stuart. Some art historians refer to this item as the Athenaeum portrait because one of the original portraits that Gilbert Stuart was working on for George Washington, it was left incomplete, but art historians confirmed that this portrait that he came up with, that would become known and referred to by historians as the Lansdowne portrait, was certainly the finished product of what Gilbert Stuart tried to finish with his original one. Now, understand that while history is within the focus of art historians and regular historians, the fields, they do have a distinctive approach to how they observe historic artifacts and how they categorize and brand each item. So I would like to begin with the historian's approach to understanding the painting. First, we are informed as an audience that this is George Washington, one of the greatest American figures in the history of the entire nation. Often, historians focus on the great contributions Washington made as he and other founding fathers struggled to establish the United States as a new country with a Republican-style government, which contrasted the established norm of imperial rule found in many European nations during the time that the US was founded and established. Also, the painting comes into focus for many historians in one instance, and this instance occurs in the War of 1812. And when we observe the painting, historians focus in on the aspect of Dolly Madison rescuing the portrait from falling into the hands of the British Empire as it was invading DC and it set the city ablaze. Now, the story is intriguing and it does have its value in American history, but when it is told, it seems as if like the painting itself is overlooked because the efforts of Dolly Madison are emphasized in this circumstance by the historian, and as a result, we see that there's more of a focus on Dolly Madison than the painting itself, because it almost becomes a case for Dolly Madison and a story about her rather than a story about like the painting and what is like the significance or what was it doing there in the first place. Now, I've been holding off on showing you the actual portrait until I got through all the other information because I felt that you would get lost within all the details. But now that we can see the image, now we can switch over to the art historian's perspective, which I consider to be the best out of the two approaches utilized when we're trying to understand the painting. Not only are we informed of the political history of the painting, but the audience also receives important information in regards to the colors and the iconography of the image that established an idea and a consistent narrative that many people, including myself in this video, and historians that continue to research this portrait will repeat over and over again about an image that was produced over 2 centuries ago. First, art historians note that this painting falls under the category of Grand Manner style art, which is the preferred choice of many European monarchs, such as King Louis XIV of France or King George III of England. As an audience, you would think that the portrait itself would be a beautiful and luxurious depiction of the national leader with jewelries and furs and these luxurious robes. But the image itself, it establishes a separate concept about the portrayal of a national leader. And within that separate concept, we also see an American identity emerge that is very distinct from the traditional European identities that are found in many of these Grand Manner portraits that portray a single individual that is decked out with jewelry and all kinds of glamorous items that just give them more attention to how much wealth or power they hold rather than what are their interests or who are they really as human beings. Now, the image we see George Washington, he's presented standing with his right arm stretched out, which art historians and some regular historians now have suggested that he is holding an orator's stance, as Stewart, the original artist, wanted to note at the importance of Washington's ability to hold conversations and influence the thoughts of many Americans during his lifetime, as well as how he influences our thoughts as Americans in our lifetimes. Also, if you look at his left hand, you can see that he holds a saber, which some historians and art historians have indicated that this is Stuart's method of demonstrating Washington's military prowess as the former commander-in-chief of the country and the military forces of the United States. Other items you can find in the portrait, such as the U.S. Constitution and other government documents, which are closer to Washington's feet at the bottom of the portrait, as well as the American flag in the seal on the chair that Washington is supposedly sitting on before he was asked to stand before us. Also, you see well, while it's kind of dark within the portrait, there is a rainbow in the background, which art historians and historians have confirmed that Stuart was trying to provide a symbolic representation of the end of the American Revolutionary War and how the portrayal of that hope by Americans for a brighter future is also within the thoughts of the American president. I think of it as certainly one of the most unique Grand Manner portraits because it takes the image of George Washington, who is the national leader, but like art historians and historians say, it presents him as an ordinary person, not someone who is dependent on wearing jewels or crowns or any kind of beautiful item to emphasize or to legitimize his right to lead a country like that of the United States. I would certainly recommend that there is more research invested into the iconography of the portrait, which there is, but certainly there's not a developed interest by general American audiences as we're not accustomed to going to museums and really focusing in on paintings. But for this specific painting, I feel like it's certainly an important part of our history that should be given more attention than what it currently receives. Some of my sources that I used for this project, I understand that it did go over the 10 minutes, but I did want to provide a very detailed and thorough analysis of the painting as well as the history that's behind it and what have art historians, and the artist himself, what information about them was very relevant to this project and how we can use that information to certainly emphasize new ideas or to encourage new thoughts and arguments for future classrooms that are going to be focusing on the early American Republic. I certainly had a lot of fun researching this portrait. I found it to be one of the most intriguing pieces of art that I've ever come across. I have taken art history courses in the past, and I've certainly learned that history itself, you can learn about it through a variety of different perspectives. And through the perspective of art history, you can certainly understand more about an image than just the simple idea that it's just an object with bright colors or some kind of symbolic representation. Thank you again for listening to my presentation, and I hope that this has generated some enthusiasm or at least spiked your interest into researching more into American paintings. Thank you.